Meanwhile, some believe that President Ramaphosa is hamstrung as a negotiator as the rolling violent protest continues there in Eswatini. You've seen the visuals. The Southern African development community appears divided, though, on the approach it should take. SADC staff have reportedly told have said that member states have been arguing for weeks about the wording of a statement to respond to the protests. Unrest flared up with protesters taking to the streets in anger over King Mswati III, whom they accuse of ignoring his people's pleas for democratic reform. We speak now to colleague Hajra Omarjee. She's political editor at Business Day. Hajra, a very good evening to you. So, this development obviously shines a harsh spotlight on the regional bloc. Do we know the different versions of the statement that are being fought over?
Well, we understand that it's been months in the making and that the various SADC countries cannot agree on the wording. That is not unusual in diplomatic terms. What is unusual is that we don't know what is really going on the ground in Eswatini. I was listening to your foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, a little bit earlier, and she spoke about how strict conditions are for the media to enter. The SABC also reported a little bit earlier about how violent and the situation was on the ground. In response to that, we saw MTN in Swaziland immediately instruct that Facebook can no longer be accessed in that country. And she drew the comparison of 1976 in South Africa. The reality is we have no idea what is going on in Eswatini, and I do think that SADC has failed in terms of assessing the situation on the ground and intervening.
Now, South Africa has taken the revolving position as chair of SADC's organ for politics, defense and security in August. But I'd like to know, what is the view of the region of its handling on the Swaziland crisis? Some have accused it of silence.
Well, the issue of sovereignty on the African continent is a major stumbling block in terms of pro-democracy forces. It seems as though African leaders respect the issue of sovereignty above anything else. We saw in 2005 in Eswatini, the king introduced massive reforms which allowed him all power and all control over all decisions, including who was appointed to the judiciary. We did not see a response from either SADC or the African Union. Now, what we do need to see as a first step, perhaps, is SADC to send special envoys to Eswatini to meet with King Mswati III, but also to meet pro-democratic stakeholders in order to understand if a political dialogue between the groups are possible and whether pro-democracy forces have a chance of perhaps convincing the monarch there to consider that as an option. If you look at Swaziland at the moment, you see transport, schooling, towns, telecommunications being shut down in intervals. The situation could not be worse. So surely this could be a tipping point, but as a starting point, SADC needs to send special envoys to assess the situation on the ground.
So, Hajra, I want to look at how grave that tipping point would be. We've just put up a map of Swaziland, clearly landlocked. Some have been critical of SADC's response, calling it laissez-faire, in fact, even comparing it to what has been the attitude around Rwanda during the genocide. South Africa's Department of International Relations and Communications broke its silence, saying that it's calling for restraint. But will this have any impact? And given the issue of sovereignty, how much intervention will be allowed by the monarch?
In 2012, when Marikana happened in South Africa and the police mowed down 37 people, in 2021, when we saw a political insurgency in South Africa, we did not see other SADC leaders comment on what was happening in South Africa. And that was out of respect of sovereignty. Also, we saw recently SADC and President Ramaphosa try to intervene in Mozambique. And while we were still assessing the situation, Mozambique turned to Rwanda in order to quell the violence in that country. But the reality is that political instability in any of our neighboring countries creates instability in South Africa as well. And we do not have an idea of what is going on the ground, or whether we are taking the lives of ordinary South Africans, ordinary people in Swaziland seriously. And I think serious questions need to be put to President Ramaphosa as the head of the Troika on peace and stability, as well as SADC in terms of its responsibility on governance in South Africa.
Thank you very much for that. Hajra Omarjee, political editor at Business Day, and of course the SABC will continue watching that situation in Swaziland, Eswatini, as it unravels. But as you heard, that there is no connectivity, so that's also very difficult to monitor.